Join our knowledgeable hosts as they dive into the captivating universe of comic books, movies, TV shows, and pop culture. Get ready for vibrant discussions and a shared enthusiasm for all things superhero and beyond. A comic podcast straight from the panels. This is Beyond the Capes.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Cape podcast. With us today is Joey Paladino of 50K Comics. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. I really appreciate it.
All right, so we actually think we connected on Instagram quite a while ago. It's been pretty impressive because you're building a pretty strong foundation. How long have you been going into this?
So into the world of publishing my comic, you mean, everything like that?
Yeah.
So it's something I've wanted to do forever. I'm 27 now. I started taking notes and like writing down different plotline ideas when I was in high school. So around 15, 16 years old. It was something I always knew I wanted to do around the time of college. And then my third year of college, I finally mustered up the courage and creative grit, I guess, to start writing scripts. And if you've ever written a comic script, for anyone out there listening, like, I'm sure you guys can resonate with the fact that the first, dozens of things that you write, you feel like they're terrible, right? Like you write and it feels bad. But then I got into a script in 2020 for New Mafia, and I was writing it, and I was like, wow, this doesn't suck. I kind of like it, actually. So 2020 is when I started writing the script for New Mafia, and then I spent almost 3 years just revising the script, putting it through people's hands that I knew I could trust, friends of mine, of course, but like I urged them not to sugarcoat things. I wanted true feedback. I wanted to know if there's a story they would like or characters they'd resonate with. And after about 2.5 years of editing the script, I finally started looking for an artist. And by the way, this is nothing you learned in school, right? I didn't go to art school either. I'm researching all this and kind of figuring out as I go along. So many things I learned along the way that are hopefully going to make the next book a lot smoother. So I started researching how to like work with artists. And as an indie person, it's, a lot more just like kind of cold calling and Facebook groups and this and that. Went through a couple artists, didn't have great experiences. It was a little bit discouraging, to be honest. Then I found my current artist, Micah, who did the whole book, cover, color, interior, line art, everything. And he was an absolute pleasure to work with because he met deadlines and he was willing to work on edits and like creative ideas. So I ended up getting super blessed in that way. And then art production, because it is a 226-page book, art production took about 1.5 years, and we published in April. And now I've been just doing any comic shows I can kind of get my foot in the door with. So I just did a show this past weekend. That was cool in Connecticut. My first show was in New Jersey, my home state. And I'm looking to do a couple more.
Awesome. Now, you said you started this obviously in college. You kind of had the scripts and you were going forward. Was this something in high school, creative writing or anything that was like, you kind of had a feeling like this is kind of where I want to go in the future? Or was it something kind of a newfound passion?
Yeah. So I guess in high school, my passion was really sports. Like I was a football player, loved playing football. When I started college, I was studying health science. I wanted to one day open up a gym, work with athletes, work with pro football players if I could. But then my interests kind of changed, and I did take more of like the liberal arts approach. Like I ended up realizing that I still love fitness. I still do it for myself. Like you might see on my Instagram that I post fitness content because it's just a really important part of my life. But I wanted to do something a little bit more, I don't want to say cerebral because fitness is very cerebral when you get into the science of it, but I want to do something more cerebral, I guess you could say. So I switched to psychology and started taking up writing a lot more. But I knew that this was always going to be like a side hustle until it hopefully one day takes off, right? So I did actually take a creative writing class in college. I actually graduated with a minor in creative writing with my psychology degree. And that was cool because that was the first time I workshopped a script. It wasn't the script for New Mafia, it was a different script. But that was the first time I workshopped a script with complete strangers. So the feedback, you can always think is a little bit more true when that's the case. So that was really neat. That's a story I definitely want to revisit one day. But yeah, I mean, I just grew up on this combination of like American comics and anime/manga. And as corny as it sounds, like Naruto and Spider-Man were my role models, which I'm sure is the case for tons of people out there. So I always knew I wanted to just put my ideas on paper in a way that hopefully people can resonate with.
Definitely. No, I first of all, your gym videos on Instagram are very impressive.
Appreciate that.
Especially when you look at like, what was it, David Mack and Greg Capullo, who are just, I don't even know how they don't like break pens, because they are just, their arms are just massive. Very impressive always. Now I'm more curious of, because you have this background in fitness, which is very unique, I think, to this story, is that this is very action heavy.
Yep.
You have a lot of detail, but I would say your fighting sequences are pretty involved for the story itself. Do you find that having that background in your fitness has kind of helped maybe flesh out some of these fight scenes?
That's such an awesome question, because the answer is yes. And I really appreciate that you like pinpointed on that, because there's one scene where Kane, the main character, he's ripping a vault door off its hinges, you know, so obviously he has to have some insane strength. But part of the realism that I kind of put into that was that in doing so, he tore all the muscles in his arms. Like, you see his arms like flush with purple, because that's what happens when you tear muscle, and then it bleeds into the rest of the body part. And that actually happened to me in high school. Right before I went to college, I actually tore my pec major. Yeah. So if my muscle is supposed to sit like this, it curled and rolled like this. So I had no musculature in this area until I had the reparative surgery. So that came from a real life experience, plus like my fitness background. So yeah, I did try to implement as much as I could from that. And then there's Vivi, she's the martial artist in the book. You know, she pulls off some like really cool WWE stunts. I'm a huge pro wrestling fan, or at least I was more back in like the early 2000s. Yeah. Now I kind of watch more casually. But you know, she's pulling off like a Hurricane Rana and all these crazy moves because she's like a nimble fighter type of thing. But I did try to vary up like the fighting styles to make those more interesting. I mean, every character in the book is based off something. I mean, you know, they say nothing's original, but you know, there's a swordsman in there, so he fights a certain way, and we try to leverage like the weight of his huge sword and that kind of thing. Vivi is like, you know, quick and fast and nimble, and then Kane is just an absolute brawler. And just like what I was talking about with the torn muscles, I was trying to implement some stuff in there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can always appreciate that. I work in a hospital in surgery, so for me, that's always big when there's almost a grounding to comic books, because we all know Superman's gonna lift a planet. Like, there's no basis off of it. It's just gonna happen. It's writing. He's the Man of Steel.
Yep.
Which is nice though when a story is grounded, it's real. I think it's easier to connect to it. So yeah, I was very much a fan of that. Now, what was it like starting? Because I would say your story is very, I wouldn't say common, but I think you're seeing a lot more of it, especially with COVID. We had a lot of people finally take that plunge like 2020, 2019, and finally get into indie publishing. But you guys had it, I wouldn't say rough, but it was definitely starting from scratch and building up that portfolio is difficult. How was that process for you?
Yeah, there's a lot to say there. One thing I feel like is that I kind of missed the wave. Like, I kind of feel like maybe right before COVID, like maybe 2018 and maybe even into like 2021, 2022, when the whole like collector boom happened. Yeah. I feel like that was the sweet spot to like run a Kickstarter and have everyone's eyes on it. And, you know, I kind of took my time with the script revision because I didn't want to start art until I felt like the script was perfect. So I feel like I kind of missed that wave. I hope I'm wrong on that.
There's definitely a second wave, so I think you're actually good, because I'd say most of our people now, we're seeing a lot of the 2020 COVID people now, their stuff starting to come to fruition. So I think you're ready to ride that second wave.
Thank goodness for that. So yeah, that was a big part of it. And again, just like learning everything that you don't know about making the book, that's a huge part. As far as like putting the portfolio together, that's interesting too, because, you know, my first book is 226 pages, and it really reflected in how long it actually took to put the book together. You know, a year and a half art production. You're not putting out something super quick. I've definitely learned some ways to like make that process go faster for the next time around, which I'm happy with. Yeah. And I don't think my next book will be 226 pages, but I didn't want to do the single issue thing. And this could be flawed logic, so tell me what you think about it. But like, I didn't want to do the single issue thing because I'm not Marvel or DC or even Dark Horse or Image, obviously. So like, I don't have readers coming back every single month for the next issue. So I wanted to put out somewhat of a more complete story where like, once you get through New Mafia Genesis, you see the origin story in its entirety, and then you can make a decision on me whether or not you like my work. That's kind of how I wanted to do it. Logistically, it probably wasn't the most intelligent because it was much more costly to do it like this, the way I did it. But now it's funny because going forward, I'm kind of having a full 180 in the sense that I think I'm definitely going to stick to some shorter stuff, whether it's like, you know, a single issue style or maybe like 50 to 100 page stories, just to like put them out a little quicker and build a portfolio a little faster. Because that's one thing I don't have right now is like a diverse portfolio. I have one long story, which I'm really happy with, but I definitely want to get some more characters and more stories and more ideas out there. But I'm kind of thinking about moving more towards webtoons because one thing I've been learning about from the shows I've been going to, you know, they're much smaller shows. I haven't gone to a Comic-Con or a Fan Expo yet to work. But the demographic I've been seeing at the shows that I've been going to, definitely a little bit older or really young.
Yeah.
I don't see many of like the people in my age range, you know, 20 to 30 years old. Although I do know there's a lot of them on webtoons, you know, with the top to bottom scrollers. And I think that's really cool. But I'm personally an old head. I love having the physical book in hand. So that's going to be kind of a hard thing to parse. And I know there are some artists that actually are able to do both. Like they'll do the art in such a way where they can formulate it for top to bottom scrolling for a webtoon. And then they can also kind of move it back to make it able to be physically printed, which is cool. So I'm still trying to figure out how I want to go about doing that. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely people that do that, and I think as long as you have a strong story, that's always key. Which for you, I think it works out really nicely, just because the amount of information you pack in this first book is a lot, and you leave it on a pretty decent cliffhanger, leading into, obviously, I'm assuming, a volume 2.
Yeah,
and I think even if you look at Marvel and DC, you'll see like these compendiums or omnibuses or even certain ones that'll be issues 0 through 5. And then after that, you'll start seeing more of like, then like 5 through 7, there'll be 2 to 3 smaller ones. And then maybe towards the last one, they'll kind of wrap it up in a bigger one. I think as long as you have a story that has the structure and the volume to fill it, it makes sense. Because if your first book, I would say at best would be, let's see, we're talking average comics, so 20-ish pages. So
right. Yeah,
I mean, we're looking at almost 30 to 40 issues right off the bat. Which, you know, I mean, it almost at that point you wonder, is it more expensive then? Because then you got to do a cover for each one. So now you got to have a cover, a specific cover for each one.
That's a good point, yeah.
You could always have fun with it in your Kickstarter and get variant artists and stuff and people you meet, and it's definitely cool. I definitely think that though it varies so much, and I think for the story you have, it makes sense because you're more telling a saga or an epic versus kind of a single issue. The nice thing too is when you go to do a single issue, it's going to be easy and hard for you. Because you've already written like these big books and you've had all this art, and now it's like, oh, I only have to fill 16 pages, and then you're gonna be like, oh man, I only have 16 pages. That will be the only difficult part, I'd say, going kind of the reverse action.
You're so spot on too, because like I remember in my creative writing class, you know, we practiced writing short stories, and I kind of felt like I was bad at that. Like you got to draw them in as soon as possible while giving enough information to make it interesting. And I'm just like, I want to like a slow build, you know, like I did take one thing from that. Like I started the book with like some solid action, I think, but I definitely want to take my time to like give information in a way that hopefully isn't rushed, but also still interesting. So yeah, the short form thing, I think I want to practice more. And I've actually had some ideas for that recently. So I definitely want to go ahead and do that a little bit more. But the other thing, I think the kind of like foundational idea for why I also want to do a longer story is just because like, you know, obviously the single issue thing is a formula that has worked for, you know, whatever, over 100 years. But like, I feel like the story just ends when the story is ready to end, you know? And to my point, I guess that's where like problems like filler come in, and fans usually end up hating stuff like filler. I guess it's more like in cartoons and anime rather than actual manga and comics. But
oh no, you'd be surprised in comics.
oh, for sure. There's definitely
Yeah.
the fair share. It's just that, like, when I guess an anime is trying to catch up to where a manga is and
Yeah.
they want to slow down, they'll put in a bunch of filler. But of course, there's tons in actual written form as well. But yeah, I wanted to just like end the story on the point that I thought would lead into the second one kind of seamlessly. So that's where I kind of that's honestly my philosophy as a writer is like I want to serve the story. I don't want to serve myself. I don't want to serve anyone else. I don't want to serve any group. I want to like let the story kind of unravel itself, and hopefully that leads to the most organic and enjoyable version of the story.
Definitely. And the nice thing too about doing stories like this, which I think some artists see right away and some don't, is you have so many characters. And you did tell some backstory, but obviously you're going to tell a lot more of that. You're going to get more depth. That's where I think like the short stories come in for a lot of people that start off this way. There's so many prequel books to do. There's so many standalones, or this person said that they can't help because they have to go on their own mission. And like, that's it. It's ominous. But then you could come back on a Kickstarter and be like, oh, well, now I'm going to finally tell that tale. So now I can do like a 3-part short story of that. So I think that's always critical for people that do their work this way and start this way, is you just got to look for where you're kind of leaving your information, because it's definitely there. I think a lot of the paths are already there.
That's a great point. If you notice, there's one character that I gave almost nothing on, Jaren. That's very intentional. I did leave some Easter eggs, so for anyone who's able to figure out what Jaren's backstory is, extra points for you. But yeah, no, you're spot on there. Like, honestly, the way it kind of works is the next several books, each character gets a little bit more spotlight shined on them. But the one thing I really want to avoid is doing too many prequel books and too many tie-ins, because that's where I feel like modern comic fans get frustrated with, like, Marvel and DC is like, well, I'm reading Civil War, just give me Civil War in the Civil War storyline, and I get, that's their way to like hopefully sell more books and everything like that. But I don't know. I don't feel like a frustrated fan base is a fan base that you want to have 9 times out of 10.
No, definitely. It's a give and take. And that's the nice thing about where Marvel and DC and Image and Boom and all of them kind of, I wouldn't say fail, but they are at the heart of it, they're here for profit.
Yeah,
if they put out great stories, it's great. Where you and indie creators and a lot of these comic book artists that are now forming their own groups, you guys are on Instagram and Facebook every day, putting these books out here, asking for feedback, doing this. Going straight to the consumer is big. Otherwise, everyone's going to cheer for Jim Lee at San Diego Comic-Con. No one's, I mean, there's probably 5 people that will boo.
Yeah.
But like, no one's going to come up and be like, oh, hey, Jim Lee, on page 62, I really hate what you did with this story. This is terrible. You're terrible. I mean, no one's going to say it. So like, they're just going to keep putting it out. And that's where I think indie creations excel. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot more of the excelling through Instagram, is because you guys do have the potential to reach out and kind of correct course when you see it.
Yeah, that's a major benefit, right? Is like, we're fans. We're pretty much fans first, So like, we get it. I think we have our kind of ears to the ground, want to see what people enjoy, and we're putting out things that we enjoy. I did YouTube for the better part of 5 years. I was like an avid competitive card game player, so I did YouTube for that for a long time as like one of my other side hustles. And the biggest piece of advice I always heard with that arena was create the kind of content that you would enjoy. And that's what I did for that. I was relatively successful in my field. And that's what I did here. I put out a story that it's a genre that I really like, which, like, indie comics has a lot of interesting genres that don't reflect mainstream, which I found really interesting. Yeah. Like, the NSFW stuff is always really interesting to see at shows. Not that I personally partake, but like, sex sells. And then you've just got other, like, horror stuff. It's just so interesting how, like, it doesn't reflect mainstream. Like, you would think that the next best indie book would be like a superhero book, something emulating Superman. And mine is not necessarily a superhero book. It's more of like a anti-hero criminal team up. Takes a lot of inspiration from like One Piece, Red Hood and the Outlaws, that kind of thing. I would wager that my book is maybe a little closer to mainstream. or at least what mainstream kind of represents. But I really wanted the blend between American comic style and manga style because that's just what I grew up with, and that's what I love. So I don't know. I kind of think that's the future, just because so many kids are also getting exposed to both. You know, you have the same kids that are watching One Piece that are going to be watching the new Spider-Man show or X-Men '97. You know, so that's how I feel about it. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I think who was that? I was just talking to quite a few people. Growing up, being born in 1990, the exact year, I could tell you that I knew like one anime that maybe my uncle had on VHS. That was the extent. Or if we got lucky, Dragon Ball from like another country shined through at night.
Yeah,
that was anime. And that's all I knew. You couldn't even talk to about kids anyone because either they didn't know what it was, or you got made fun of because they're like, why would you watch this? Who's gonna ever watch this?
right.
Now you walk into a Walmart or Target, there's like 20 different shirts. You have rap artists. I mean, you have an Olympic runner that carries Exodia with him.
Yeah, Megan Thee Stallion doing the Sailor Moon thing.
Yeah, so I mean, it's crazy to see how it's evolved. So that's definitely, I think, helped the influence of some of those shows come through. Now with this genre, obviously action, kind of adventure, it sounds like from the anime and the comics that you do like, that's obviously a shared theme.
Mm-hmm.
Doing this, is there a theme or a genre that you have maybe read that you are more interested in trying maybe next, or as a short story? Like horror, I think, does have so much room kind of in this prose to work with so many different stories.
Yeah, to be honest, for me, I am a sucker for the mainstream. So like, I definitely have some superhero ideas that I'm going to be implementing. And the thing about New Mafia that I think is really cool is like this motley crew is going to be like the antagonists for a lot of my hero type characters, which is why I was really happy to like establish this first.
Yeah.
To kind of almost put it in reverse, you know, like what if the Joker had his own story first and then Batman got introduced, you know? And obviously there's people that really love Joker, but I don't know if there's people that like root for the Joker. I mean, there's people that really love the Joker, want to see him in as many stories as possible, but you're not rooting for him to, you know, kill half the people in Gotham, you know what I mean? But these characters, like, they have their motives and you can get behind them because they're written in more of like an anti-hero way, but they're not, you know, law-abiding citizens. So when I do write the hero counterparts to that, I kind of have like a trio in mind, like, you know, sort of like a DC trio, like 3 to 4 characters that I think are going to be the pinnacle of what I'm going to create. And these guys are going to be like, not even the Suicide Squad, because they're going to play a more pivotal role of like, you know, this real clash of ideologies, you know, like I want to run the world my way. That's Kane's whole thing, right? Like Kane thinks he knows best. Kane thinks he can run the world in a way that's quote unquote fair, but can you ever be like a fair dictator? You know, that's going to be interesting to see. Whereas you're going to have like the hero type character that's going to be like, no, everyone should be able to do their own thing. Like you should not have complete autonomy over everything. So that's another reason why I'm really happy with starting with this particular story, but I'm definitely going to dive into the superhero thing. I don't know if I'll ever do horror because I was never a huge fan of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sci-fi is cool, but you can always blend sci-fi with superhero stuff, right? Like Guardians of the Galaxy, for example, you know, Star Wars and superhero comics. So I think I'll always dip into a little bit of everything, but it'll probably emulate a little more the mainstream just because that's what I personally love.
Gotcha. So obviously the whole reason we're here is to talk about New Mafia. So obviously you are the owner of 50K Comics, and this is your first book, and you know, published. We're set to go. So for everyone listening, what is kind of like the, you know, like the pitch if you had to describe your character's storyline that you would give them to kind of entice them?
Yeah, definitely. So New Mafia takes place in a slightly dystopian Earth, and the main reason it's dystopian is because crime is more mainstream, right? And it differs by regions. But in this story, we go through Chicago, we go through Pittsburgh, we go through a few other places, and you know, in these kind of like deep cities, crime is much more mainstream than you would expect on our Earth, our version of Earth. So this is a criminal team up story, action adventure, just like you mentioned, where the main character Kane, his father is like the Illuminati. He's the guy that runs everything. He has the world in the palm of his hands. And for a cornucopia of reasons, as many of us come to do, he hates his father, right? So he wants to basically create his own organization from the ground up, take over the world, ultimately dethrone his dad. Oh, and by the way, they're both demons. Cain and his father are demons. So like there's that supernatural element as well. I love the supernatural aspect. So not so much horror, but the supernatural elements of horror I am a really big fan of, like angels, demons, monsters, that kind of thing. I do find very interesting. So that's basically the elevator pitch. He wants to create his own criminal organization from the ground up, take over the world, and see if he can run things the way that he sees fit so that crime can be fair. You know, like in the story, he says something along the lines of, you know, crime can be profitable and it can benefit us really well. But, you know, innocence should never be forced in harm's way. Like if you don't want to be in this life, there's no reason why you should have to be, you know, those kinds of things.
Definitely. Now it is interesting because the first part of the story was definitely like your Ocean's 11, getting the band back together, which is always fun to see.
I love the Ocean's movies, by the way. That's awesome. Awesome reference.
So it's always good to have, like, you know, going city to city, collecting kind of your different people. Now we ended the story kind of in more of a trio, which is, I think, for standard comics, like that's always going to be your core group when you look at it. You know, DC obviously has the legendary trio: Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. Marvel has, you could argue, Captain, Iron Man, and some would say Thor. You could kind of interchange, but those are kind of the big three there. What was the inspiration? Because each one of your parties is vastly different, which is always good to do. But was there any reason like you wanted to do it a specific way, or you just like that's just how the story unfolded for you?
There's so much there. Like this story is really the love letter to like a huge number of things that inspired me. So, for example, like with Jaren, there's the whole like mysterious swordsman thing, which has been done a million times, but like I really like the idea of like Orin and in the manga element of the whole thing, like the mysterious swordsman is someone you can like play a lot of jokes off of because, you know, they don't know how to take a joke and they're too serious for their own good kind of thing. Vivi is like the martial artist of the group. So, you know, she takes tons of inspiration from like fighting anime and the way she moves is very fluid and really would one day be very cool to see with modern animation technology, like the way they do certain anime and whatnot. And Cain, I mean, I feel like for his goal of like, you know, I can run things the way that would benefit everyone the most, he's got to be the sort of like, he's like sub Deadpool in the sense of like, maybe more like Johnny Storm. Actually, I think his personality is like very Johnny Storm, where he's very full of himself, very confident, but when push comes to shove, you know, he can be serious, he can be a leader. Obviously, he's like still learning how to be a leader and that kind of thing. But yeah, there's just so much inspiration into these characters, and it really is like my love letter to all the different things that I've been inspired by over the years.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you put a lot of work into the story. Like I said, first book, almost 200 pages is huge start.
Yeah.
Now, I really am curious is how far in the story have you gone with this? Because I know some writers will actually start from the ending and then they'll reverse engineer their whole process to the beginning. I don't know if you ever had an ending in mind.
That's a great question. So, like, you know, I kind of take the approach of pro comics where it's like, you know, there's no endpoint for Spider-Man. You know what I mean? And I in that way, I do kind of want these characters to be eternal. Although I'm always open to a great ending. That's always definitely a great thing if I can ever manage to come up with one. For this particular story, I have the next 4 books outlined, and I'm in the middle of the script for the second book. So I'm kind of taking my time to work on that, because the other thing that's been kind of pulling away my time from the creative work is the business aspect of the whole thing. And that's been another learning experience. So now I was like, you know, getting my business filed, signing up for shows, trying to make my website as best looking as possible, trying to get on Amazon and other places to sell my book. So yeah, the business elements, you know, alongside my full-time job has been definitely a little bit time consuming, but I'm hoping to kind of get that all under reins. Like My next big objective is like get on Amazon, get on some other book selling websites. And once I have that kind of bunkered down, then I really want to dive deep into the creative work again and finish that script for the second book. And while I have the next 3 books outlined for this storyline, I do have a lot of outlines and even some partial scripts for those hero type characters that I was talking about. So I also want to get into that, but I'm like, you know, how do I start producing multiple books at the same time? Because money is a factor, you know, but obviously there's Kickstarter. I'm always going to try my best with Kickstarter. And the more books I can sell for New Mafia, the more I can put into other works of art too.
Definitely. And now, as you said before, you have obviously another story in mind with heroes. And you've opened this book up to a universe because obviously the world is run by crime. You obviously have made it clear. Kane for sure. The demon family itself, even towards the middle of the book in the end, it's deep rooted in society, especially in certain cities. You can definitely see the hierarchy change depending on who's running it. You kind of set yourself up for a world building event because there's so much room to go. I don't know if that was your intent or if it's nice just to know that you could have a multiverse down the road.
Yeah, no, it definitely was the intent. Like they travel a lot in this book, and that was one of the ways I could world build, where I can like kind of drop Easter eggs about these different locations. Like, you know, one thing they mentioned is like the city of Los Angeles, which like there's a whole Los Angeles, Southern California story that I want to do. And I don't want to like, you know, I don't want to take the Marvel approach of like just focusing in New York City. I don't want that to be like the only hub of my my stories. Like I want to have people all over the globe doing that kind of thing. So there were Easter eggs dropped for that. That was definitely intentional. And hopefully, since you thought about it, hopefully I did it somewhat decently. But that was a big piece of feedback I got in script revision was like, you know, world build. It's hard because like you want to show and not tell, but some things you have to tell. And I think the way I did that is like through narration. Like, you know, you don't have Kane just saying, well, this is the world where it's more where crime is more mainstream and da da da, like kind of like a rolling credit. You don't have something like that, but it comes up in character conversation, comes up in dialogue, comes up in internal dialogue. And that's the way I try to do it. Hopefully it was smooth.
Yeah. I think it's more curious because when you start a book like that, you always wonder how the world got to be that way. At least for me, I always wonder like, I wonder what was like the cataclysmic event. Was there one? Was it just that society naturally degraded down into this, which some people don't like that answer, but hey, that happens. So yeah, I'm definitely always curious to see how the story unfolds with that. Now what is interesting is earlier on you said obviously you would like to do a webtoon, which is always great because most days people have access to the internet.
Right.
There is obviously stipulations, so no one listening to this don't get crazy. I understand. But what's more interesting with your book is the art. And we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. The artwork itself reminds me of the old 90s Flash. That was huge when people were doing Flash artwork and, again, Newgrounds and stuff. And people were making some comics that have still and images that still live on today because they were so well told during this time. Your story has the potential, obviously, I think it's really well formatted if you were to do a web version, but I almost feel like it's more better format if you were ever to do a video or animation. I don't know if that's ever crossed your mind.
100%. That is actually on my to-do list, is to kind of look into someone who can do not like a full-on animation, but sort of like take my panels and do some mini animations, because I think you can get a lot of value out of like advertising there, right? Because it makes it a bit more dynamic rather than just having like a page. Also, motion comics, like I would love to do that as well. I've toyed with that idea. I don't think I have the voice to do it. Even though I have like the YouTube recording experience, I don't think I have the voice to do it. So I have to find some like people who are willing to do voice acting, and you know, cost is always a limiting factor to all these things. But I do think that those are really great ideas. Like I do want to kind of have different mediums for people to enjoy. And then if one day, like, you know, a studio wants to do an animation, I mean, that would be incredible, because I'm of the belief that like for this type of thing, for comics really in particular, like, yeah, the silver screen is like the end goal, I guess, but it's always going to be best done in animation, because, you you can always capture the most outlandish things in animation. But yeah, those are all things on my to-do list. On the other side of my computer over here, I actually have like a whiteboard where I have my exact to-do list, and that's one of the things on there.
Yeah, and animation is great. Obviously, we all were happy to get like the MCU, the DC movies and everything, and that's great. But realistically, you have to think, well, I can't do so and so because that's not feasibly possible, and there's not enough budget. Animation, if you want to have someone, have 20 buses this and go to Vegas and blow $1 billion, there's no limit to the sky.
Right.
Which is nice to know that you truly have no budget in that sense. Obviously, you have to pay an hourly for an animator to do it, but they can get a lot done within that hour animating versus trying to figure out how to real world do something.
Like Invincible, like imagine ever trying to do the train scene in real life. Like the CGI would just be like 90% of the movie's budget in that. You know what I mean? Like
that whole movie, that whole show would be like 95% CGI. Just so you could capture the raw kind of story of it.
Exactly.
Now, in terms of the art, as we were just talking about it, how many renditions of this did you go before you finally, like between you and your artist, you're like, you know what, the look of the character you got down, I'm very happy with this, and I like the direction that we're going with.
Yeah, so before I got to working with any artists for like the interior of the book, I did my character designs first. So I actually got each main character, done by 3 to 4 different artists. So I can, I had my base idea for how I want them to look. Yeah. I have like a document where I have the outline for every character and like, their general features and their backgrounds and this and that. So I got each character done by like 3 to 4 different artists. So I can kind of like, have a few different perspectives on what this would look like. And then going with I had 3 artists before I finally linked up with Micah to do the full thing. So they, and I knew every artist would have like sort of a different spin on it. But once I got to Micah, like he already knew what the characters looked like based on those other artists' samples. So that was relatively easy. He obviously got me some sketches before we even started the interior, just so I knew like, okay, he's got a real good idea of how the characters look and their mannerisms. One thing I feel like Micah's really good at is showing personality through their little random looks, and he's really great too. He was really great for what I wanted in terms of blending the comics and the manga, because there's certain expressions and certain like unrealistic things that manga does that comics don't, and he did a lot of that in the book too, which I was really happy about. But yeah, once we got started with the interior work, like he had the script, and a fair amount of changes had to be made to the script. Like this being my first rodeo, I kind of knew that I jammed a little too much on a lot of the script pages. So the script went from like, I think 140 pages to this 226 page book. So we added about 80 pages, which I knew, again, going into it, I kind of expected that. And now I have a better idea for script number 2 for the second book of like how to more properly space events. So that was a great learning experience. But yeah, so basically he would get me a week's worth of work, and then I would approve or like, hey, can you make this small little edit? But normally it was never nothing too crazy. He really had a great mind for like what I was going for with a lot of these things. And it was relatively smooth sailing from that point.
Yeah. Do you think the flow will change on this next book? Because I know sometimes relationships definitely change, and a lot of the creators we've talked to, once they learn the strengths and weaknesses of their artists, they've noticed that their writing will sometimes change, where they're still telling their story, but they're able to put the words in the description of what they want to play up the strengths of their artists, so that it all kind of meshes even to a higher degree.
That's a great point. Like I think if I do work with Mike again for the next book, like I definitely know better ways to communicate with him, as where now if I work with a brand new artist, it's going to be like relearning that whole thing. That being said, I do want to explore some other art styles too. Like I got introduced recently to like this pool of Italian artists, and I'm Italian, so like there's some slight bias there. But like I got introduced to this pool of incredible Italian artists. One of them is doing one of the Boom books, I Heart Skull Crushers. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
So good.
Yeah, his art, I love his art style. So like if I can get someone like him, he really has like a manga esque style,
Yeah.
which I really, really like. So I'm definitely gonna like go artist shopping again when the second book comes around. Really just for the fact that I want to like diversify the art a little bit, like see which style matches my book the best, I guess. But on a similar note, where you're talking about like with like playing up to the strengths and like putting in those final edits and stuff, like I actually did the lettering on the book myself. One reason was to save costs, but for this, the other reason was I actually wanted to learn it, and I have a long way to go to improve it, as I'm sure you can tell in my lettering. But I was happy with it, you know, for what it was, and it was my way of like being able to put the last touch on the book. Which now that I did it this way, I kind of find it hard to believe that authors actually hire letterers because, like, you know, there were certain ways, and this is like kind of circling back to what you're saying about the art and everything. There's certain ways that dialogue just like sounded better to me once I saw the art. Like I wrote the dialogue one way in the script, and then I saw the panel, and I was like, okay, it seems a little bit better if I make this small change. And you can't do that as nearly as easily once you hire a letterer. And if you want to make an edit, you have to go back and forth and like, okay, change this sentence, change that sentence, and everything. So hopefully I'll get much better at lettering so I can actually do the last minute edits and still have a good looking book. But that was a really interesting thing that I learned too.
Now, did you use a colorist, or did your artist do both the art and the color?
Yeah, he did both. And that's circling back to something we talked about before. That is a way that I can hopefully speed production for the next book, is to have a separate line artist and separate color. That is something I definitely want to do to hopefully speed up production for the next book.
Yeah. Now I'm assuming that obviously you hired an artist because you can't draw. Did doing this project though make you at least want to understand the foundations of it or get into drawing, or is it just something you're just like, you know what, it's like a fun side thing maybe when I'm done with the second book, but I'm good not touching a pencil or pen?
Yeah, I don't think I'll get into drawing personally, although I did learn a real appreciation for the craft more. Like I already knew that people who could draw are like super ultra talented. That was like super obvious, but like the whole thing of like storyboarding the panels, coming up with those like super rough sketches, because like me and Micah would actually meet once a week and go over the storyboard. So it wasn't even like I handed it off to him and didn't hear from him for a long time. We met like every single week for a year and a half, which is kind of crazy to think about, to be honest. It's as close as I think I'll ever, well, maybe not I'll ever get, but it was the closest I could get to like the Stan Lee version of making comics, where he would just like, all right, here's my idea for the Hulk, go crazy. Here's my idea for Captain America, go crazy, you know? I was really happy to have that connection where we can meet once a week and really just iron out any details that need to be ironed out. But that's what we did, yeah.
And I guess speaking on this process, because we're going down the line, editing. Were you your own editor too?
I was, yes.
Did that drive you crazy?
It did. By the time I was done with the process, I was like, just send it to print. Like, I don't want to look at it anymore. It's cool because on one hand, I know my own story like the back of my hand, which as a writer, I feel like you should. But yeah, so I got the art back, and I had no real concept of how long it would take to letter and then do final proofreading, right? So that took an extra few weeks than I thought it would actually take. So that delayed the timeline, because I wanted to have this thing published in February, which is my birthday month. No real reason I wanted to have it during my birthday month. It's just that I set a goal of February. Yeah. That's what I put on the Kickstarter as well. But I had no concept of like how long this was all going to take. So I ended up actually publishing in April, which was fine. Like everyone on the Kickstarter was super understanding, and they got the finished product, which I'm super happy about. But yeah, so I did the lettering on everything, and then just read through 226 pages, you know, probably 10 times, and made those final things. Like I tried to make sure the eyes were correct, because that was a rule I learned. Like, you know, if I is standalone, it's got the crossbars. If I is in a word, it's just a straight line. And now I see those things even in pro comics, and I catch those mistakes, and I feel good about myself, you know? So I really do want to like amp up my lettering, and if I can do that for other people's books, or, you know, just improve for my own book, I'll be really happy with that.
Yeah. No, I think this process, And I would say the same for us, talking to creators and really learning the process as I've interviewed people. Walking to a comic book, like the first thing most people would be like, oh, new Spider-Man. I wonder who the villain is. I'll be like, oh man, look at these colors. Oh man, look, from page 3 to 4, look at how they laid this action sequence down from left to right. It's such a beautiful flow.
Yes.
And I think that's natural.
When I guess like, yeah, in college, when I really got into script writing, that's how I viewed like everything I consumed, like comics, TV shows, movies. I enjoy them for what they are, but I'm also like, oh, that works super well. Like that exposition was awesome. Like it wasn't too wordy, it wasn't too rambly, or that action scene was awesome, or this thing didn't work. And I want to try to avoid that type of thing in my stuff. That's what I'm doing on my Instagram too, is like some very short form, like not even really reviews, but like learnings that we can take. Like, we're watching House of the Dragon now week to week. And I posted some videos about House of the Dragon. During season 1 of Invincible, I posted some things about like, I really liked what they did with this, and I would avoid, this type of thing. So yeah. And I think that's something that I've never really seen, to be honest, is like, you see people do reviews all the time, but the sort of like, okay, if you want to be a writer, this is what you can learn from this. I think that's cool. That's something that I would like to see. And it goes back to the whole thing of like, create content that you would want to consume.
Yeah, no, I think it's, everyone likes a good review. I think now more than ever, I think most people watch more reviews. I know many people that don't even play a video game. They just watch other people play it and review it because they like the in-depth story.
I love reviews too. Yeah, I watch tons of reviews. Yeah.
I mean, it's just nice to get someone else's opinion. I think it hasn't caught on because there's so many people that there's such a fine line between reviewing and then just completely trashing someone's work. Which is crazy because there are some people that will get famous for reviews and they'll just be like, oh, this was a horrible episode. I don't even know who directed it. But you work in HR. How many things have you directed? Yeah, it may not have been a great episode of this season, but I know personally I couldn't direct an episode that was $2 million. I wouldn't even know where to begin.
For sure. That was a piece of advice that I got early on when I was like sending my scripts to friends and some people that have like some experience in like comic journalism. Is like, I had a friend who like I wanted to read my script, and he worked for a comic journalist website, and he was like, once you're named as like a comics journalist, no one thinks you can write a script. And it's that kind of dynamic of like, well, yeah, you're gonna say all this crap about my story, but like you couldn't write it if you tried, and that's fine. I think that's everyone has their different calling, right? So like, if you're able to write a story, that's great, but other people are going to be better at analyzing what could have been better, and hopefully they always deliver it in as respectful a way as possible. Like, I don't want anyone to ever sugarcoat my work, but if you could be nice and not make me feel like a piece of garbage, that'd be cool.
Constructive is always good.
Constructive would be nice. If you don't like me, you don't like me, I guess. But constructive would always be cool. Yeah.
Was in the words of Vanilla Ice, collaborate and listen.
Yeah,
that should be the new bumper sticker that this goes across. Now, you've had the story down. You put it down. You have these 3 characters. You've told your first part of the story. Did you find your opinions changing as you wrote the characters? I thought Kane, I would love. He's your standard, guy with hidden potential. You really don't know what he's capable of just because of his demon background. You kind of allude to it at the end that there's a lot more to come with him and what he's capable of. But I would say I'm more interested in why Jaren is the way that he is, because he is so quiet. And that's usually in anime. That's the person that ends like that one weird fight and just completely shocks the entire story.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm saying something wrong right now. I feel like I'm talking about my own children, but like Jaren is like my favorite right now. And I feel like I shouldn't have a favorite, but like for those same reasons, like I've always loved like the mysterious silent type. He's super cool. If you think about like the X-Men movies, this is kind of a weird tangent, but I promise it's going to come full circle. When you think about the X-Men movies and what they did to Rogue, they made her the character in which the viewer can see what's going on, right? Like everything was brand new to her. She was the kid type character. And like, she kind of went through everything that the audience is going through, learning everything. That's sort of like Vivi in the book. So, you know, she has power, not sort she sort of does and doesn't have powers. It's kind of complicated, but like she is the character, like she's learning this whole criminal thing. She was not a criminal, you know, beforehand. So she's learning the whole thing with the audience. Hopefully she's more grounded with like her brothers and her life and what she has to do to kind of make ends meet. And then Kane is just like, again, that sub Deadpool, like he's wacky. I can do creative things with him. And he's like a really dynamic main character where he's one part asshole. He's one part leader. He's one part friend. He's one part boyfriend. Like that's another really interesting thing to kind of parse is like, when you write a character and, you know, if someone's perception of Kane is like, oh, he's the goofy guy, but then he has a serious moment like there are in this book. There's a fair amount of serious moments, and someone will call that off character. So that's an interesting line to dissect is like, how do you make a character so well-rounded that you want to implement something reasonable and have it be considered within character, you know?
Yeah.
I'm actually interested to hear your take on that. If you have any opinions on that, like, do you feel like I did anything that Kane shouldn't really do that, or like Vivi, that's kind of weird, you know?
No, I would say, and I think that's where it depends on who your reader is. For me, obviously, strong comic background. That's what I grew up on. So I would say I always go off of archetypes. And for me, they fit the archetypes. You know, the overcompensating leader who has something to prove because on the inside he's completely crushed and destroyed and he just wants to, you know, be happy. You know, you have the female with the troubled past. Like I could tell you like right now there's like a whole paper you could write on like the archetypes.
Yeah, the
and for me,
as
long as it fits the archetype, like I can give it so much more leniency because like I think it's gonna fit like that parameter within, you know, certain degrees.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely am fully aware of like those archetypes, and like I don't want to sound original, but like those are archetypes that I also genuinely enjoy. But I think I'm taking those archetypes and I'm gonna try to do the most interesting things I can with them, like, you know, show them in a new light or make a character you can really relate to, hopefully, and kind of go from there. And then the one character that you're about to meet because you're about halfway through the book is Abel, and he's just like, I don't even know what our kind of archetype he fits into. You'll have to tell me when you kind of get to that part of the story. So yeah, I tried to just do as many different things, and that's the cool part about writing the story with so many different central characters, like important characters, is that you try not to get lost in the Eternals problem, right? Where there's just like way too many characters and not enough of them get screen time, not enough of them get attention. But you also want to try and make every single one of them interesting and compelling and relatable as possible. So
definitely. No, I think like I said, overall, it was a really strong foundational start. And I know we can't wait to kind of see kind of how the story progresses. So obviously, as you showed, you have the book out.
Yep.
The book has been published. So you did have a Kickstarter because you said you were able to fulfill.
I did. Actually, I ran 2 Indiegogos and then a Kickstarter because like this took 1.5 years. So I had a lot more runtime, I guess. And I was able to fund the first Indiegogo and the Kickstarter. The middle Indiegogo didn't go so well, but that's totally fine. But yeah, I was able to fully run the Kickstarter. Thank you so much to every single person who, you know, showed support and love for that. Couldn't have done it without you guys.
Awesome. So for everyone listening now, if they are interested in getting their hands on the book, where is the best place to get them now?
Yes, so www.50kcomics.com. I actually put the first 44 pages on the website for free. It's actually really mobile friendly. Like the Zoom feature works really, really well, and you can read everything really clearly. So it's not quite the Webtoons level of fluency, but it does work well enough for what it is. So yeah, the first 44 pages are there. I want you to read it, and if you like it, pick up the book. If you don't like it, that's totally cool. But I didn't want people to have to, like, you know, invest in me blindly, I guess. Yeah. So first 44 pages are on there for free. You can buy the book there. You can buy the merch. I got the 50K Comics shirt here with the new Mafia logo on the back. I think it looks pretty awesome. I'm going to work some more merch with some other ideas too. And then Instagram, 50kcomics. I'm posting honestly a lot of random stuff, like my fitness stuff, those movie or media reviews / like learnings. I'm posting those as well, and then just random stuff from my books.
Awesome. So, and for everyone listening, what are the next steps that they can be expecting with this story?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm in the middle of script 2 for the next book. I am looking to get back onto that, honestly, after a little 4th of July break. I want to get my ducks in a row with the business side of things, get the second script finished. It's probably going to be shorter. Like I'm thinking more of like 100 or less page story this time, nothing in the 200 range. So I could put something out a little faster. Still trying to decide if it's going to be mostly digital or mostly print, but I would say, just stay tuned for updates. Hopefully in the next few months, I'm starting art production for that.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on the show, answering our questions. Everyone listening, we are going to have him tagged in the description on Instagram and this YouTube video, so you can find him there. You can also listen to this wherever you get your podcast from, or go give us a follow on YouTube and watch it here. Thank you again for coming on, and we look forward to watching your work unfold.
Thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate it.
All right, everyone, have a good night.